I'd like to recognize Dr. Norbert Heel and Ms. Kathleen Redery, Mr. Paul Spruhan, Mr. Paul Spruhan, not here yet. Dr. David Wilkins and his spouse, Shelley. Mr. Robert Hershey and Professor Emeritus. Dr. Pamela Palmerter. Thank you for being here and helping us with our issue here. As we start the day, I want to encourage all of you to engage and participate in a positive and constructive manner. The intent of the presentation is to inform and educate on the history of blood quantum, its impacts to our pueblo, and what it possibly means for our future. The basic question this informational session will help us to answer is, does the Pueblo of Laguna want to continue with the use of blood quantum? Yes or no? The issue that is before us is membership in our tribe. This is about inclusion and belonging, not exclusion. As we go through the next couple of days, I will also ask you to think about the word membership. We are using that word very conveniently and maybe even unconsciously. But does the word membership translate to belong? We have many of our people, young and old, that only know Laguna as their home, but they don't belong because of blood quantum. I encourage you to have an open mind and an open heart as we listen to the presenters and the different perspectives that they will share with us. You will have an opportunity to comment and ask questions as we move through the 2 days. I want to emphasize that this 2-day session is not intended to make any decisions, but it is entirely meant to inform and educate our community on this topic. So when we get to the point of seeking your feedback and input, you are better informed and equipped to contribute to a solution. In closing, I will humbly ask that we not use this platform to offer negative criticism or use it as point of argument or judgment, but instead, I will ask that we use this opportunity to learn with each other's and from each other's, because this topic affects every family in our pueblo, and we must work together on this. So once again, thank you for coming out and participating in this important meeting. I'll go ahead and turn the floor over to Dr. Luarki and Ms. Alcivayo. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor, for the introduction, and good morning, everybody. Ho in the Tower Street, Josh. Tawai, ho ekte. We are south. Emission yakunets. It's election. Ako took in the strana. Strana. It's ayut. Joanna mat on the park on the emets. Come it's still. It's great. I'm glad all of you are here this morning and have, as Governor mentioned, took the time to come spend with us today. The next couple of days. It's a very critical issue that we're faced with. But unfortunately, we're not alone in this issue. There's tribes across this country and in Canada that are dealing with this whole challenge of blood quantum and how do we continue forward. And so the work is very critical that is taking place right now, because the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, or even the children that are not here yet, they will be affected. And it's something that we have the opportunity to input and to influence in a positive way. We also have the opportunity to not do nothing. But I hope that as we go forward in these next couple days, the information that we've put together for you provides a platform for you to think through and consider. As Governor mentioned, the information has not been put together in a manner that says we will make a decision on this today, but we hope that it frames a thought process for you. I hope that it triggers conversation amongst all of you as to what this means to us, what it means for us, and most importantly, for the children going into the future. So just a little bit of backdrop on this, on the work that's gone on in the last couple of years, or year and a half, I guess. As was mentioned, the council has directed the committee to focus on finding alternative mechanisms to address the blood quantum issue. As part of our committee, when we started the work, one of the major challenges we had to overcome just amongst our committee ourselves was the conversation to not focus on benefits. The discussion today is not about benefits. That may come way later, but today it's about belonging. It's about who we are. It's about our identity. The other piece of this was making sure that people during the next couple of days as we led up to this, that you feel safe, that you're comfortable in making your comments or asking questions. So we encourage you to please offer your thoughts, comments that may make this even better. The other reason we've gone this path is that we can't expect you to just stand here and give us feedback when we haven't given you a better backdrop. So the presentations that you're going to hear today are meant to give you a basis of, so where did blood quantum come from in the first place? Where did it start? So we'll have Mr. Paul Spruhan given a backdrop from the legal perspective, of course in layman's terms, because most of us aren't attorneys, so he'll do it in a manner that, hopefully we can all wrap our brains around and understand how that applies to us and how it's impacted us. We're going to have then also the opportunity to have, after Mr. Spruhan, we'll do a presentation specific to the Pueblo. We'll share some data with you that from our enrollment office, Ms. Lorraine Silva has helped us put together. And it's very striking, as you'll see in the graphs that we'll show you later, the impact blood quantum is having on us. After that particular presentation, then we will also have, at lunch, I think we have a pretty special gift at lunch. As many of you know, we've had a long history with this. Prior to 1958, you only had to be one half Indian to be enrolled in Laguna. You didn't even have to be Laguna. You just had to be one half Indian per the 1940 census. In 1958, there was a constitutional amendment made that changed that from being one half Indian to being one half Laguna. And so that's where the Laguna blood quantum piece came in. And we have a really special presentation today that Mr. Ron Solomon is going to share the history of his grandfather and their family. Because I think it's very critical to where we're at, because it's a unique situation in that his grandfather was from Zuni, but served as our governor even prior to the 1958 constitutional change. So he's going to give a really neat presentation. We've had a chance to get a sneak peek of it. So what that does is it gives us an idea as to begin thinking about, so how did those that came before us deal with this issue? Was it policy driven, or was it community driven? And so those are things that I hope that you can think about as we go through the day today. And then we'll wrap up the day and with some reflections. And as you'll see, hopefully all of you have gotten copies of the agenda. We have like what's called a word cloud, where we'll go through that when we get to that point. But we also want to take time for you to ask questions and comments. So we're, after every session, we'll give you that opportunity. But as we start, we're going to probably start with the most important piece. I've asked our Kiva leaders to assist us in this. So Mr. Rick Smith and Mr. Conrad Lucero will help us. Achua Ryan Aragon was not able to get here today. He had a previously scheduled appointment. He's out hunting, so hopefully he has luck, out there. But they're going to help us probably from the most important piece, and that's our starting point. In that, in setting the tone and going forward, I want all of us to remember that we're all of one source. We're all of one creation. And they'll help us to hopefully be reminded of that in a positive way. Because this is about tribal membership and how do we belong. But also, in their conversation, Governor hit on something very key. We're using the word membership very conveniently and maybe even unconsciously. But does that word even translate to belonging? So those are things that I hope that, we think about going through today. And so, again, I'm going to have Elsie come up and make a few final comments, and then we'll get right into the presentation. We have the opportunity to have you all engage. I want you to be thinking about as well what we are as a Pueblo, but also what we are not. Start thinking about things like our clan structure. What role does that have in our identity? What role does that have today? So thinking about those things. And as you're thinking as well, one of the things that council asked us to do, because this issue affects, again, practically every family, we know that everybody can't be here today. And no matter what date we try to set this on, there's something going on that we're going to be conflicting with. But we also have tribal members that are maybe in the military, that are away at school or wherever life has taken them. The council felt it was very important to make sure they're included. So the event today is being live streamed on YouTube. We set up a YouTube channel. So the URL that you see up here on the screen, if you type that into your web browser on your phone or whatnot, you'll be able to go to a YouTube channel, and then it's going to show the event, and we'll have it captured there, so you can also go back and view it. So those of you that have phones, if you have your relatives that are away, please feel free to send that to them. Also around the room, you'll see we have 3 facilitators, 3 helpers. Here's one of them, Ryan, full disclosure, my son. We also have Yakame, Antonio Romero. I'm not sure where she's at. Oh, she's right here as well. And we have Miss Tony Toribio. She's way up there on the top, in the back. But these are helpers or facilitators. One of the things that we've also have set up, so if you have an iPhone, you can turn on your AirDrop. Turn on your AirDrop feature, and they'll AirDrop you the link. All right, so we also have other helpers from our Kuwait youth group who are here. They're wearing turquoise shirts or black shirts. They're way up there at the top near the food. So there are helpers as well. So if you need anything, assistance with your wheelchairs or your walkers or just finding the bathroom, or you want another cup of coffee for our elders, I've asked them to help you with that. So please feel free to call on them. So with that, let me call up Elsie here to offer you some final points here, and we'll get going.
Good morning. It's nice to see everyone here this morning. There's one point that I'd like to stress, and that's think about the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. A lot of them have grown up here in Laguna. This is the only place that they know as home. And some of them don't have the blood quantum to be members. but yet this is home to them. And I know that this affects just about 98% of the homes in Laguna. Those are the people that we need to think about. So as you listen to the speakers, please keep that in mind, that it's the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, or those that aren't here yet. Those are the ones that we're thinking about. And so I'd like to make this short so we can get to our speakers. I'd like, as we progress through the next couple of days, I would like to emphasize the following points for you to keep in mind. To think about belonging, allowing our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren to belong. To be proud to say, I'm Laguna, I come from Pauari, I come from Punyikaya, Tsiama, wherever. And think about our teachings from the age on how we should exercise our values and principles. Think about your grandchildren and the grandchildren that are not here yet. Don't critique, but let's work together toward a solution. Remember, this is not a village meeting. Please be respectful to each other when making comments. We are building this plan together. We encourage respect when making your point. Others may want to comment or ask questions, so please get to your point so others have the opportunity to comment as well. Let folks know we are going to be writing a paper and we want your voice. We'd like to keep this as positive as possible. We'd like for you to listen carefully to the speakers, listen to what they have to say, and I'm sure that will help us to decide what path we're going to take. And enjoy your day. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Elsie. So at this point, I'm going to call up Mr. Rick Smith and Mr. Conrad Lucero and Mr. Ed Tremaya to start our first presentation. And as they're making their way up here, I also want to extend a great and sincere appreciation to Adina and Min and the staff here at Laguna Development Corporation, as well as Skip Sayer, who's helped us in the coordination on this back end. You might have seen the big marquee out here for about 2.5 weeks, almost 3 weeks now. The marquee has been running with the graphics or the video announcing this. Min has helped us with all the technical setup, and Adina has just been incredibly helpful in coordinating the food and everything, the tables that you all see. So thank you to the group. And just for your reference as well, up in the front here, you'll see tables set up for the council members, the speakers, our facilitators. So please feel free to come and speak to them or ask questions once they get done if there's something that intrigued you about their comment. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get into the first presentation. And as I set it up here, Ed is going to facilitate this, but just to share with you the backdrop to this. So we are taught that we are all of one creation. The universe, the earth, spiritual deities, the animals, the people, we're all created with purpose. We are all connected. We are all related. We all belong. When we were brought into the world, the Creator did not put a label on us. As we start our work for the next 2 days, it is fitting that we all start from the same point of reference. Let's start from a place of oneness and belonging, not from a place of exclusion and labels. The objective this morning is to have our leaders offer some reminders and foundational elements for us to think about as we progress through the next couple of days. It will be important for us to use this information as the reference points for our decision making and solution generation as we address the challenges of how we belong and the peculiar situation blood quantum creates for our existence. Points I want you to think about, just keep these bullets in your mind as you're listening to the gentleman talk. Think about how we're all connected. Again, not just human-wise, but to our surroundings and our universe. Our responsibility to each other. Important, think about what is not said. And how does belonging get expressed through the voice and the heart of our Kiva leaders? So think about those things. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over here to Ed to start the conversation with him.
Nas James, cái sẽ hộp bắt đó when the tao straight trash ku so en a kai dran you cái when the tao chỉ star sa tao chỉ cái này sẽ sốc chân vậy cái yếu chứ ku tu na tao tu na tao chỉ cái quy sẽ you hay si crazy sẽ nhá you am cái tu na tu chỉ cái it's a quá chỉ share you cái anh it's a hell chỉ cái ru sa sẽ và tu mà chỉ nhá và share host cái tin oh yeah qua share si new ze ru sa she he ko ta we ji je ru sa she stra pa pa game she stra na na game she ha zu mai ku kai tra share tu na ze kana share qua ji za he this yak me ku za siu ze xia ju she ko gum she he men ai tra ju za na ka wei kan ta ju ka za na ho ze ho ye me ji ka wei kan ta tru a me he zi u ta wa kai ji kai a me he you kai tu na kai zik tu hach wa a tsani kai no a me he you kai tu na ji a nei me mi tu na ka si kai ga me kai you tan je ka tsmiri ka tama zit ho no ko ponye ka ni steni 2015 kai ga share me you good kai you ga zi you ga you ze jus et kai share tu mai ko share kai wa ka share si a nei me et you ze kana I was just expressing my thoughts and some of the concerns and some of the issues that we've been facing here in Laguna for a number of years. And again, we've come to that point to where, again, like I stated, we might not have anyone to call be Laguna anymore in the ways of blood quantum if we continue to use that. But we're going to have a discussion here concerning some of those things from our religious leaders' side. But again, as Dr. Luarki stated, we're one as a people. Hanu stop. From the time of emergence, we came out as one people. We didn't come out as Lagunas. We didn't come out as Akamas, Zunis, Hopi, any other tribe. Hanu stop. We were the people. We had a belonging. We belonged to someone. We belonged to one another. From our mother, we had a belief system of our universe, our earth, our spiritual deities. We had those beliefs, all of us. We came out as one community, one unit, one, for lack of a better term, tribe. But again, because of being conquered by the outside world, we had to follow, we were pulled into those, their governmental affairs, which we embraced as well. At that time, our tribal leaders, I'm sure, maybe didn't have the full understanding of what direction they were taking us. But having said that, we continue to try to improve off of those policies that were created. I'm going to just briefly touch on this. I hope I don't take too much time. Because I think this is really important, is that Back in 1887, I'm going to go back that far, to the General Allotment Act. A lot of you men, a lot of you people know what that entailed, especially those of you that have served in council. Throughout Indian country, it took away at least about 90 million acres of land, which rightfully belong to Hanuk Tapache, Hirumet, and then some right now to this point in time. Now, take back to the present. We are talking about President Trump and some of the policies that he's attempting to put upon our spiritual lands, our sacred lands, and continue to take those things. It's a scary situation. It's a concerning situation. And even going back to labeling, we weren't labeled to be Laguna. We weren't labeled to be other tribes that came later. And absolutely, again, like as Dr. Learke already stated, going back as far as the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. And I'm going to read this because I found this again, I know that it's in there under the Reorganization Act, but I also got this out of a book called The Great Vanishing Act. And Mr. Norbert Hill was I think that was part of your as well. Mr. Norbert Hill was part of that as well, that part of that book. And this is just one portion I took out of that book. It's about the Reorganization Act of 1934. This legislation attempted to designate who was Indian. More to the point, Indian were defined as members of a federally recognized tribe, and they and their descendants must have resided on the reservation as of June 1st of 1934. And Indians who were defined as all other persons of one half or more Indian blood. Already back then, the government's way of taking the Indian out of the Indian, taking the Laguna out of the Laguna. And again, that's part of how labeling begun, basically. We continue to label one another because we're 6 different villages. We have Hatzak, Guishchi, Kawik, Bunyikaya, Tsiam, Tsimuna, I school Tumitramu, Tsimunamet. We are labeling each others as being individual villages. Because we're putting our own selves in those kind of situations. We're one people. Again, also going back, even when we were conquered, let's put it that way. But then we were given another name, Laguna. Laguna. What is that? A base of water or whatever channel of water, maybe whatever it was, that was given to us by the Spanish who conquered us back then. We were given those names. So we're labeling ourselves, continue to label ourselves. We need to get away from that. We need to continue to think about it as oneness. With that being said, I just kind of gave you a real brief glimpse of some of the things that was concerning to me. And again, as Elsie had already stated, it's very concerning that we need to keep focus of what the purpose of this conference is going to be about. Take out the benefits. Take out land, anything, everything else, but think about the future. The future of our children. The future of our grandchildren. The future of our great-grandchildren and further. because they're the ones that are going to be affected by that change. To continue to move forward with it. That's for you to say, not for this committee or any other committee that may be sitting here later on. That's not our purpose. Our purpose was to research. We're going to present this to you on all the research that has been compiled since 2017, 2018. 2 years we've been working at this. So with that being said, I want to thank you. Just gave you a quick glimpse of what our focus is. So now, panel discussion-wise, I think one of the things that I had asked Mr. Rick Smith to kind of expound upon is, through our religious teachings, what is your take on who belongs? What does that mean to you in that context?
Good morning, Sergeant. They say opa ta strict Josh. Tawai mai ma shong twan na mani wi kai us kai tran ya tu ma siot. Tik na trana is je ho skau tran. Skau tran ian so shit and tikana. Em he shong twan ma mu sku na mani to nak ti kui shwi kai us. I again, this is kind of an unusual situation for me, but I've been asked to help with the process of information to be provided to the membership in regards to things to consider going forward. The question of existence and belonging in the history, oral history provided by ancestors many, many years back, our grandfathers, our fathers, grandmothers, who are the keeper of this information, provided us very valuable bits of information to think about moving forward. And one of those things was belonging. We indeed are one people. At the beginning of time, at the time of emergence, we came out, as Ed mentioned earlier, we came out Hanutzesh, Sichtzesh. So that included all of the red race, all of Granash, that's who it included. That's why we're referred to Taya Hanutzesh. And with that in mind, everybody had a purpose. We were all, at the time of emergence, identified as equal. We were all equal of equal. Everybody had a role and responsibility. Not just one provided all of what was needed throughout the journey of our people. Everybody contributed at some point in time, and nowadays they call that our strengths and weaknesses. Everybody has a strength here. Everybody has a purpose here. And in order for us to benefit moving forward, we all need to be allowed to provide that help when necessary, the strength that you have within you, the God-given gift. Because those that may be leaders today do understand this. Yes, I understand it very clearly. You're not always going to be the leader. Most times you're going to follow. Because there's going to be times like today when we're talking about membership, blood quantum, belonging. Somebody has the answer here today of what we need to think about moving forward. So when we go through this process today, think about that we all have a purpose in life. And when we can come together as one and work together in harmony, then we are going to see the blessings, those things that we need to consider moving forward. I wanted to share that with you because anytime you assume some type of a role, such as the tribal leadership, such as the traditional leadership, such as being a supervisor or boss at work, the way I've been told in growing up, it's not an authority you're given. It's a great responsibility that you have. And how you're going to work toward being responsible for what you've been given, that is something that we need to consider moving forward. We all have a responsibility. A lot of people talk about authority. I don't see it that way. I see it as a great responsibility. So we all have to look at it from that content going forward of what are we responsible for today. I was always told that decision making, anytime you're going to decide something, make sure you try to look 40, 50 years ahead of time, if you can, before you make that decision, because that's who it's going to affect. It may not necessarily affect immediately today, but as was mentioned earlier, those that are not here today yet, it's going to affect them. I wanted to share that much with you as a start. I know there's other questions that we're going to be asked, but we all belong. We all belong here today. Remember, we're Hano, Siish. So what does that mean? You know, that doesn't put anybody in front of anybody else, you know, leave anybody back behind. That means that we're all here today to work together for a common goal moving forward.
Thank you for those comments. Now, the same question back to Mr. Conrad Lucero.
Vemos out James, okay? Then I wish Janet Jesse Jay, Games do not know it's I keep say to go out some mark, okay, come on. I know Station could go out Dana, school come, take a this guy, and she could go out. The cash piece or June Josh, so she is get Hano Stan. Che my mark, I must, Gaika Stana, school come. Hike a hope a Hano Station. Is cao strum, hopa stem. Sẽ cây khai chan ưu trí xia. Cây giá trị ôi chế sẽ mua hệ. Chỉ kén nó nhị thác cô sa chỉ qua cây khai chan sẽ chỉ nấu ya cha. Et ba cô cây khâu thu nhị mà sa chỉ cây hệ wa. Cô trái á chỉ mình sẽ anh cái bộ hát sẽ cây cầmตัวchỉ chỉ quyền. Et ba cô wa et sẽ heme ôi chế. Dona qua et you to get any jay strange. Zakana is guest ani. Et ma mai amukai is satim ekatsa. Hat is trashe. Zazi hat is gasho. Heme pashus itran. Trana is a hoes go tran she hea. Na you understand to hea. Hatin Josh Joinche. That's is Jago. Bashus new Johnny, you might use Jazque. I'm here, that's a hat is Gasho. Et Hanos Yeshe, Ishke, Bashu Nijan, Shuntuch, Hemekoi. Shewa is you with you. Or gates and at the Sheshwa. Will you know? Ancient did you. You know, did you say, however, school? It's a nation. Say, is guess, you can stick. shipa sopas tiek. Tsatsi kai sai tsi yunash kuash kayutsa. Ewa mu ai tse shehe nyetsani kunishe tsatsani she membership. Wa he ami utsish tani. Kua howi ami tse she. Ho na akshawi she. Shatyum kshakui kshana kshane shek kshana papa howi. Hoti niu tako, hoti niko. She ai siu kwa tiu. Kua. Yu shu tsanak chus. Wa mi he. Tsa kai he wei tse she nai cha kon. Mi yu na. Tsi tsu tsish tan shu. Ku tsi mu hanuk tia shu wa mu wei itek chai chan. Nya ka shu ni she. She ai siu ko. Kua et yu no e shu ni she. Pa ko no shka shu. Hanuk tia she. Et wa kai mu nya na de se. Ak kua. Duna kach chanan dem sha papa dem she. Kua kayuts. He am tsi niu tsi stiak chus. She wa kai siu ku kai chan tsi chu chen tsi no is gao ya kum. No is tsi ho is gao chan. He tsi no is gu chaish kwe. Et mu pato a chu tsi stis awi dem she. Chanai. Kua iske hanun taas chun she. Skai ni kwe. Tama beach heme skai ni kwe. Uito nim utsu tu kai amu a chuman chenya a chuman ayawish. Wa kai ti get up struak. Za ho shui down he zi tse she. Kai kene Nhua back charge, but what does our Jamsh? To a that's it, just a sit no mas, say, come a coyotes.
I get this rock bench to die, Konama. What I get my get up dick rock and our tribal interpreter is going to interpret a small portion of what was said here. So, Alvin, next year, Alvin Martin. Say, oh my, wait.
Tao ai cái paket từ xây hộp bao anh tao ai chỉ charge cái toán mà chỉ chết cũng có tu nãy nhất chỉ cần chết sai auction cũng có tu quỷ game mà đi stick cũng có sự chỉ charge cũng sẽ chịu sự như cái gì trả này chỉ sẽ có sự chịu cái áp sẽ tu nãy chỉ mình nhiều anh mà cái trong amu mà chơi gia như cái chỗ ta chết cũng có sự sáng tu nãy cái tu nãy cả mà Rick, ewa OC, como katuna, ewa mo OC contention tonight. What he said was the governor had already touched up on some of these stuff that Conrad said. So that we're all lagunas, all of us, but in this time went along, things changed here on the reservation, and the things that of how we came about, and everything that this is all said over at the Easter Vigil during Easter time when the people from Laguna all meet at the council chambers and talk about our history of how we came and all that, and this is all told here, and this isn't the time to be saying that here. So, and these are some of the things that he said, and how things are gonna be changing in the future, as far as how we live here on the reservation, and our mother didn't give us. I mean, we don't own the land here that we live on. Our mother provided that land for us to live on, to take care of it. you know, so we don't own the land, you know, it's still hers, but she provided all that stuff to us so we could make a living off of it, you know, I mean, live off of it and, you know, use it right. So that's how come we say, I mean, you've all heard that let's take care of our Mother Earth, you know, which is what we should do, you know, take care of it instead of trying to destroy it and everything or not treat it right, because we do live on this earth here, and that's what our mother provided for us. And and as you know, that we all came as one people. We're all natives, Hanusta people, Indians, I guess you might say, but like then things changed, and we all don't live the same way. There's other pueblos up north that they all have their ways of life and how their government is run and how they run their pueblos, and we're all not running our pueblos the same way, and but we got to remember that we all came from one place, and like today we're here to see how we can figure out a way of who belongs, you know. We're gonna hopefully get an answer to, I mean, somebody out there has an answer to how we can get this fixed as far as who belongs. And you guys, we've all heard earlier that, you know, our kids, our grandkids, our great-grandkids, and all those that have yet to come, you know, those are going to be affected. And so hopefully with that, and I mean, our mother gave us all this, so this is what kind of I just kind of touched on what he kind of said, but, you know, it's, as you all know that, you know, once you try to translate this back into our own language from English, it's kind of hard, you know, you can't, you know, there's words that we don't even use in our language that, you know, you have to describe the whole thing. So that's basically what he said. And, you know, I mean, I'm here if you guys need to hear a little more, come up, feel free to come and ask me, or, you know, approach me if you're on the floor somewhere. But
Dawai, one of the things I want to point out, just maybe as a marker, as we're going through the next couple of days, also use this as a learning moment. We know our language is very fragile. We don't have many that speak the language fluently. So use this as a learning moment as you hear these men or any others that use the language. For those of us that are still learning, write down a word or ask them what they said. Or if there's somebody sitting next to you that knows, ask them. So let's kind of make this our classroom too today. You know, the next couple of days, let's try to help each other with a word or two as we're going. So as we're coming down on our last few minutes here, I'm going to ask them just a question to respond on. And I'm sure we all had our different takeaways from what the both gentlemen have said to us. But one of the takeaways I got was leadership in whatever role is a responsibility, but also belonging is a responsibility. How, you know, expressed in the context of belonging, what is our responsibility to each other?
As I mentioned earlier, when they talked about belonging in our oral history, it means being responsible to assist one another, to help one another in time of need. The word love nowadays is used very loosely. But how I was taught about the true meaning of love is being together during good times and bad. We can spend a lot of good, happy times together and show our love for one another at that level. But when someone may be down, may have had a difficult experience lately, which we have personally, That's when we show our true love for one another, by being there for one another, by helping one another through those tough times. I think that's the greatest thing that we could do to help one another, and being responsible as a people to assist when in time of need. We don't always all have the answers, but you can learn. And if you're open to learn, and you learn things every day of your life, and some of the things I've learned lately are from my own grandchildren. The other day, it was interesting because at the school, they are trying to teach the language to the kids. One of my grandsons came into the house the other day. He's one that will speak. He comes in, Gwazi, Tawai. Then his little brother came in same way, Gwazi, Tawai, yeah, one, come in. And then the little one said to Nana, I looked at him, he said, Pa, me come a shot. And, you know, ina hueme Nana, Tawai. I learned something that day from him. And I don't know, like Alvin said, there's not it's hard to interpret that. But the other one said, what did he say? And I said, that, in a way, it's kind of hard to interpret, but he said not to be mean or not to be a bully. That's what he said. So, going back to what we're here for today, as I mentioned earlier, we all belong here. We're all Hanotzesh. Hanostapachi, you know. So in moving forward, let's learn from one another, let's help one another. And let's take on the responsibility of being Gawaikum, if that's what we're going to continue to label ourselves as. Because it's a great responsibility. How I was taught by the men in my village was, anytime there's work in the village, anytime the hooch and he calls to assist, that's a part of being Gawaikum. You go help. You go be responsible as an individual, and you go contribute. Whatever it is. If there's a gathering such as meetings, you go and help that process. So everybody has a sense of belonging in our place here in Laguna. We all come from different sources as well. But our tribe has always been known as an inviting tribe. That's why we're, you know, if anything, there's very few full-blooded Lagunas if we're looking at blood quantum. Wamutista, Senam, sitting here, as mentioned earlier, Ran, Suanista, Machita, and there's many others. I have a little grandson that has a number of, he's connected. And as we discuss this going forward, let's think of those individuals. Because, in my opinion, he's only going to know Laguna and where he lives and where he's going to grow up. And the teachings that we're going to provide him as a community, not me alone, as a community. That's what he's going to learn. And that's what's going to tie him to us. As Kawaikameh, we want to continue just knowing who we are as one people working together. We do need to help one another. Every day of our lives, we need to take on responsibility of being responsible to one another and helping in times of need. So that's my comment for now.
Who belongs? That's a broad, broad question. Or maybe we should say, how do we belong? Simple. Wa manish ena senata. Heme strana is kaini kuinche. Subscribe to you go. We're apart. We belong. We're family. We tunyim. What does that mean? Obedience. Kumza. And Rick just talked about how we should participate in those things when we're called upon to do. That's being obedient. We tunyim. Being true to yourself, being responsible to live the life, a good life. Kenya awatramani, be respectful, not only of yourself, but to everyone, all that's around you. Everything. Again, that goes back to obedience. I always be family. That's how we belong. Kai mat sheshwa kai wei zeshe. Zazna hati. No ya haika koi kamet zeshe. Shkuwaza. Mamu manash. Zatimu drai kanata. Ha. Mutsitsa. Etisi. Ziksazi haika koi kameshja. Yenyes aya. Aishchuakam, chaya wakshan, chaya beta. Hoheka koi kamekta. Etwa yani ewa zeshe. Wa cheshe shwa mukai tatimu ekatsa. Tunatu ich shkuwa tunishi. Kutzazna. Tunatsa kuishi. Wa ame to nipshe zachum. Sanana diemshe. Zapapa diemshe. To amezik wa kanan diem kanku kapapa kutsani kuenshe. Zikametze amu eins eischt. Etwa kimu kayu koko elsi kanada. Iat stikju kitoni mishe, kuni mishe, kutoni mishe, heme koi kame shaashe, kuni mishe, kuahe. Mutumam shawap. Yue, wemetze eisawa, sayechti. Sakunayu. Hatsu shutu, you must see het zeshe, kunayu zeshe. Kunayu means stepchildren. My oldest daughter, she's from T.O., from Arizona. Hamash utzeshe, hemish genyetza. Shawa nuyu mam, hianyetseshe, tramut. Ziksatsi, wa koikam, hemish, kutiki metza. Muamhe wemesana, wamhe sanata, she shuk chanat, wamhe newtis chiactrus, howie, goa, iach, oi tesho, estruaj, konituni kunshko, to nazunya kunsh. Etwa heme, goat, the subetoshe. Who belongs? How do we belong? The responsibility that we have is those Tama Beach, Jana, Kuin, Heme. That's how we belong.
Doi.
Dai Maima, Dai for your responses to those questions. And again, I hope that it's opened up your minds to kind of some of the thoughts that were the direction we want to take this. And again, remember, it's about belonging. Some of those things that we want to talk about. I don't know if we have time to interpret. Do we have a little bit of time? Just real quickly, we're going to, for some of us, again, I do apologize. I know we sometimes forget that sometimes we don't all speak and understand the language. So I'd like to, just real quickly, have our interpreter just interpret just a small portion of that, please.
Okay, chỉ cần tôi đã chịu bề tỏ chỉ hết cái cục chân gì chiều em mới cái như cái cha nó hỗ trợ xây hay cái câu ấy cái mình cha phải cha nó muốn cái nhiều ấy chú ai cái look I forgot I'm supposed to be speaking in English I'm sorry forgive me they said hardly anybody is Fulbright Laguna anymore here on the reservation, and like Conrad told you guys to look around and see who's sitting next to you. Are they full-blooded Laguna? Or, I mean, most everybody right now has got some kind of different blood from another tribe or even non-native. So, I mean, that's just something that we need to think about. And but the only thing that they really want to say is like what our mother wants us as people to do is be obedient and have faith and have respect for others, and let's be related to each other. Where that's all she wants, and like the kids, it's going to catch up to the kids when they're the ones that haven't come yet or are still young and everything. These are the ones that are going to really affect them really more than any of us, really more than I guess the adults now. And then like Elsie said this morning, the kids that grew up here, I mean, how do you place them, I guess, as far as being, are they Lagunas because they've grown up here, or, these are all, and like Conrad said, he's got kids, stepkids that they're not all Laguna. I mean, these are the people that we want to know how are they going to belong here on the reservation or as Lagunas. This is one thing that's hopefully somebody has an answer out there to how we can fix this. But these are just some of the things that he said. And forgive me, I was supposed to speak in English, but I'm not really fluent in English, so you have to forgive me. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, thank you to our tribal interpreter for interpreting it as much as we could. And we come to the conclusion of our first portion of this of our presentation. And again, remember that talk to each other, ask each other, are you full Laguna? Go it, commit stop sayo. Dawai. It's me say go it, commit stop out you. Some of us are half, some of us are 7/8, and again, and like I said before, is that when you can fraction, when you think about blood quantum, we're fractioning who we are. You can only fraction a fraction until you come to 0. That's concerning. I have a grandson, just real briefly before we go into another, because I'm not going to take too much time. I like to talk. I like to sing too, but I'm not going to sing for you right now. The thing is that, also a comedy show. The thing is that I also have a grandson who we're not able to recognize because he's more Mexican than he is Laguna. But he comes from me. And even I'm not full Laguna. For one reason or another, I haven't found out why. But it's my parents' fault. No, I'm just kidding. When you talk about clans, clan relations used to be very important to where you couldn't marry into your own clan. It's happened, and that's why I am a product of that. So I'm both. But also, again, like I said, I acknowledge my father here from the Sun clan side, that comes from the religious side. He's my father, and I respect him very highly. He knows that too. So anyway, those are things to think about which are concerning. Those are concerning issues. So keep the focus of what our conference is going to be about. Who belongs and how we're going to take it. Tawai. Okay.
Join me in giving a round of applause to our speakers here. Before they depart from the stage, one of the things that I think is a very important takeaway, as you heard them, it's all about inclusion, about being one. The outside, it's about separation and individualism, different conversations. So I would encourage you to think deeply about what they shared with us this morning. So the next presentation we got coming up is on your agenda, the influence and impact of federal law and blood quantum and Native identity. I'm going to call up Professor Robert Hershey and Paul Spruhan. And this is the beginning of the piece where it's going to be very important for us to share with you, so what got us here? What is the backdrop to this? And so they're going to share some information with you. The membership committee had an opportunity to hear their information, the presentation, and it's pretty interesting. But we're going to go ahead and call them up here and start their piece of the presentation here. So at this point, I'm going to turn the stage over to Mr. Hershey to start the introductions. And again, Professor Hershey, Robert Hershey, is Professor Emeritus from the University of Arizona School of Law, where they've done an incredible amount of work. And he has many years working with tribes in this area, in this space. So without further delay, I'm going to turn it over to him and start their show. So the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a skateboarder from Hollywood turned Native American rights lawyer. I got the lights right here, right at home. Of course, I never was on stage with a microphone like this. But to be able to be here in this lovely theater, and I want to thank you for inviting me to your ancestral territory. It's a privilege and an honor to be here. Before I introduce Paul, who has a tremendous presentation on the history of blood quantum, I want to just say a few words to you as a law professor about the nature of federal Indian law, at least as far as the United States is concerned after the Revolutionary War. Early in the 1800s, the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court was Justice John Marshall. Those of you that have had American history in all of your schools, I'm sure, know that the justice, he was also with George Washington during the Revolutionary War. But the foundational principles upon which all federal Indian law is based is contained in a series of cases called the Marshall Trilogy, and I'm not going to go ahead and tell you all about that, other than the first case in the Marshall Trilogy legitimized, and it's the foundational case of federal Indian law, legitimized the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery basically said that Native Americans, native inhabitants, the indigenous people of lands, had no rights to themselves. because you were not Christian peoples. And this goes back to the whole time of the Crusades. It goes carried forward into the 1400s when the colonists were coming over. And it basically said that the courts of the conqueror will not make an apology for the conquest because of your character as Native Americans, as savages and warlike. The European conquerors, the non-native people, had a right to go ahead and subjugate you, to kick you off your land, to determine that you only had a temporary right of occupancy which could be dispossessed. That is the basic platform, the fundamental basis upon which all federal Indian law to this day and age is based. It was based upon a racist formulation from that time on, that time forward. You were called domestic dependent nations. So you got the term nation from there, and the idea of sovereignty came from this idea that you were sovereign nations, but you were domestic dependent, dependent on the United States. And that's where, in those cases, the entire guardian-ward relationship arrived from. So that the land that you are on, your ancestral territory from time immemorial, and all your creation land is held in trust for you by the United States government. And we're going to talk tomorrow a little bit about what that measure of sovereignty means. But for today, I want you to understand, too, that the idea of an Indian is a white construct. It's the white imagination that tells you. When Columbus came here in the 1400s, he basically wrote a letter back to the King of Spain, and in a parenthesis, he called the native inhabitants Indios, because he thought he was in the Indies. But that formulation, that word has stuck throughout the last 500 plus years. And you would think that we'd have enough sophistication to understand that you're not just all Indians. You're Laguna, you're Dene, you're Dona'atam. You're what you call yourself. It's what you identify with. You're individuals and communities and of people. You're the people. So you've been given these labels as savages. Then you've been given the label as degenerates. Basically, how a non-native person contrasts himself with you is how non-native people define themselves. They give you characteristics. They say you're lazy, communal. White people are individualistic, independent. They denigrate those characteristics, and they define themselves by what they are not. That is still going on today in the United States of America, this idea of racism. Defining yourself by what you're not, by denigrating the characteristics of other people. That's what's going on, continuing today. Then you became environmentalists, where you rode your ponies along the sand and you didn't even kick up blades of grass. You were just smooth gliders. Then now, of course, you're rich casino operators, right? So I have a few things to talk to you about this tension between racial identity and political identity. But let me introduce Paul, because what Paul has done, and I think more than any other person, has written exhaustively on the issue of blood quantum. Paul is an attorney for the Navajo Department of Justice, and he's been a fervent Dene advocate, Indian rights advocate for quite a lot of years. He's done his article, A Legal History of Blood Quantum in Federal Indian Law in the South Dakota Law Review, and he's also written about the Certificate of Degree of Indian Blood and the role of that in defining identity. And it's a tremendous presentation that he has for you, so it really is an educational tool for all of us to understand where the whole idea of blood quantum came from. So with that bit of introduction, I introduce Paul Spruan to you. You want the mic?
Hello? Wow, these lights are bright up here. I can sort of see people. Hello. There's a nice echo in here, too. Professor Hershey outed me as being connected to the Navajo Nation. You will notice my bio does not say that.
Oh, excuse me.
Oops. Anyway, no, in my professional life, I am an attorney for the Navajo Nation. I live in Fort Defiance, Arizona, if you know that particular community. My wife is Navajo. My children are enrolled at the Navajo Nation. And even a tribe as large as the Navajo Nation, over 300,000 members, are dealing with these issues. There was an enrollment bill that was introduced in this council to deal with some of the issues dealing with Navajo belonging and citizen and membership. And there's a vigorous debate in not only the Navajo Nation Council, but in the Navajo community about how to deal with these particular issues. Now, I'm not here, of course, on behalf of the Navajo Nation. I'm here in my personal capacity, but we're going to talk about where this idea came from. And I want to emphasize, I'm not here to tell you what you should think. I'm a non-Indian. It is not my business to decide who is Laguna or not, or who is Navajo or not, but to inform you about where this idea came from, so you can understand the context in which blood quantum became the membership requirement for Laguna or Navajo or any of the other tribal nations. But ultimately, this decision is for each tribal sovereign nation to decide for themselves, however you decide, exactly how you're going to define yourself. But where did this idea come from? This thing called blood quantum, these fractions that these esteemed gentlemen were talking about. Let's see if my clicky works. Indeed it does. You will see this little cartoon in your booklet. And this is something from Indian Country Today, where two young native children are talking about how you deal with these mathematical calculations. And if you know anything about the enrollment roles that the BIA created, people had a real difficulty understanding fractions and how to add them together and divide. And so you'll get a lot of crazy fractions which are actually incorrect because people had to figure out the equivalency of fractions and add up all of these different blood quantums to figure out exactly what this child was. This is how Pascua Yaqui conceptualizes this. If you go to their website for their tribal enrollment department, they're trying to teach people exactly what this is. And so they use pie charts. The dark presumably is Indian or Pascua Yaqui. The light part is non-Indian. And you can see this is a very complicated concept. This is also something on Pascua Yaqui's website, but this actually comes from a chart created by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Someone was talking about earlier fractions becoming zero. Well, you can calculate out exactly how that is going to happen. You go with one parent on the left side, the other parent on the right side, you know their blood quantum, and you come up with the child's blood quantum. So you don't actually have to know how to add together and divide equivalency of fractions. Just look at this chart. It goes all the way from 1/64th to 63/64ths. I suppose in certain tribes like Cherokee, you need a much larger chart to go all the way down to 256 and 1024th, even though technically the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma does not use a minimum blood quantum. However, they still issue certificates of Indian blood, and so they are still calculating this out and giving people a CDIB that may say someone is 3/256. If you know anything about one of the only Indian Child Welfare Act cases to come to the U.S. Supreme Court, they actually knew the blood quantum of the little girl, which was 3/256. And the attorney for the GAL hammered, probably literally on the podium, 15 times in oral argument before the U.S. Supreme Court, and she's only 256, only 256, arguing, of course, she was not legitimately Indian. Some people have made abstract art, by the way, out of the CDIB chart, so you can actually find this on the internet. Now, what's this thing? The BIA created a manual for tribes in the Phoenix area in 1984 called Tribal Enrollment, and they thought it would be a good idea to explain this using conceptual art. So this is the BIA's idea of what blood quantum is. Best as I can make it out, Dad is full Indian, Mom is apparently only Indian from her knees to her feet, and the child is only then Indian from the belly button to the feet because the child is 5/8. So the BIA actually thinks this is a good idea to educate people as to what blood quantum actually is. This is an actual government publication where they included this picture. Of course, you may have seen these. You may have one on you. This, of course, is the CDIB. If you go to eastern Oklahoma, it is a laminated credit card size document. The Navajo Nation, for whatever reason, we still like the old school 8.5 by 11. It is lime green for some reason. My theory is that someone bought 5,000 reams of lime green paper in 1984, and they are still working through that lime green paper, which is in a closet somewhere in the census office. But for some reason, it is lime green. So CDIBs. Where did all this come from? How did we get here? Well, this is an idea that goes way back in Europe, some 500, 800 years ago. If you know anything about the Spanish Inquisition, they had a lot of concerns about people who were Muslim or Jewish who became part of the Spanish Empire because Spain had taken over southern Spain from the Moors, who were Muslim, and absorbed Jews. And so they decided, wait a minute, you need to be pure Spanish. And if you're not, you need to have a document that says you're not. And so this concept of limpieza de sangre, literally the cleanliness of blood, became a concept in Spanish society where people persecuted others if they did not have pure Spanish blood. Now, of course, our legal system from the United States comes from England, and they had a concept at the bottom, if you can see it, of so-called whole or half-blood. If you know anything about Harry Potter, of course, one of the titles of the books is The Half-Blood Prince. And if you know anything about the last Harry Potter book, there's a lot of discussion of so-called muggle blood versus wizard blood. This is old-school English concepts. Now, really, it was a property concept between half-brothers and half-sisters and who could inherit property. But this notion of fractionated blood, because literally, of course, if you get a blood transfusion, you can't tell that. So it's really what we call a metaphor. You're not literally talking about buckets of blood or whatever. You're talking about ancestry. Already in the 12th century in England, you had this concept of you're a half-blood, not a whole blood, therefore you can inherit or not. So then, here's an example. I wish we wore wigs still in American courts. Apparently in Canada and Australia, you have to rock the wig when you're litigating in court. Alas, not in the United States. But this old guy here, Mr. William Blackstone, is commenting on why that is. And everyone's blood is only the blood of their ancestors. You're only really of the blood of those people. And so this is 1765. He's not talking about races per se. He's talking about just generally in English thought, there's this notion that there's this thing called blood that comes from your ancestors that only you have. But then it comes into the colonies in the United States and becomes a racial device. It becomes a way to separate people and say, you have these rights and you do not. And so the first statute that at least I found is from 1705 in Virginia, of course, a slave state that also still today has Indian tribes. Actually, Donald Trump signed a bill early in his presidency recognizing 6 Indian tribes in Virginia. So even back then, there were 3 different populations that they separated out: blacks, Indians, and whites. And they decided certain people could marry each other, certain people could testify as witnesses in court against each other, certain people could carry firearms. But how do we deal with intermixture? People had children with other people all the time. So these are not clear, discrete categories. Well, we'll apply blood quantum. And we'll say, if you're descended from a black person or an Indian person within a certain number of generations, you are not white. And you do not have the rights of whites. And so we will see 1785, of course, the United States now exists, Revolutionary War. The state of Virginia is the first one in its legislature to use blood quantum as the definition. And you will see it defines mulatto, which is a Spanish term, by the way. Anybody who is 1/4 or more Negro blood, we're going to be using some very strange terms throughout this discussion. Negro blood is a mulatto, and therefore cannot marry whites, cannot carry firearms, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the first example. So blood quantum is not a federal concept originally. The United States government did not invent it. They just took it and ran with it. But it pre-existed the existence of the United States. North Carolina was very busy in the 18th century. You probably won't be able to read this, but there's 4 different examples of talking about mixed blood individuals, Negroes, Indians, et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't just Virginia. All over the eastern seaboard, the legislatures of those states decided we have to separate out Indians, blacks, and whites, and if they intermixed, we'll put them in one category or the other, which usually meant if you were descended from an Indian, regardless of how many generations, we'll put you in the Indian category, and therefore you can't marry whites, you can't testify against whites, etc. There's a bunch of cases about blood quantum in the state courts in the 19th century. Again, if you want to look at this, it's hard to see this on the screen, but it can be made available, I believe. Different, and not just southern states. By the way, this is not a southern slave concept. Massachusetts in 1810 had to define who a black person was. Ohio had to define whether a person of 1/4 Negro blood was black or white for purposes of voting. And marriage. In Maine, they had to decide in 1852 whether a woman who was 1/16 Indian blood could marry a black person. This is an interesting case from 1816 in Massachusetts, and it was actually about 2 different towns who didn't want to pay for someone who they thought was a pauper who didn't have any money. So apparently it was a welfare-type system, and they said, this is your problem, not our problem. But one of the things they had to argue about is this guy an Indian or black or what? Because there was a tribe that was living in one of the towns, and the question was, is he an Indian? His mother was mixed Indian, his father was a black slave. And this is what they said about mom. It really doesn't matter whether she was mixed, again they use the term mulatto, as long as she was one of the tribe. As long as she lived with the tribe and was a tribal member, we will treat her as Indian. So another case from 1847, a mixed Choctaw woman who wanted to repudiate a contract she had made. Alabama law, after they removed most of the tribe, said, if you are an Indian, you cannot yourself enter into a contract. So she entered into a contract, we don't know the circumstances, and then said, well, I'm an Indian, therefore I was not legally competent to enter into this contract. That's why she argued she was an Indian, went all the way to the Alabama Supreme Court, and they said something similar. As long as you continue to live in a tribal manner, it does not matter if you are mixed or not. Therefore, she was an Indian, therefore her contract was null and void. And so we see this tension. It wasn't always that people applied blood quantum and said, you're not Indian. There was a robust conversation going on throughout the 19th century as to how to deal with this issue. Treaties. Treaties with Indian tribes, of course, ended in 1871. But between 1817 and 1871, we see both tribal nations and the United States grappling with the issue of mixed-race people. The first reference to someone who is mixed is from 1817, the so-called Wyandot or Huron tribe. There are provisions in there that says we will give payments to these mixed blood individuals. And there was an important reason for that. When the United States expanded into the so-called Northwest Territory in the Great Lakes area, they ran into people who were mixed Indian and French. The French had a very different relationship with tribes in those areas that were the Louisiana Purchase. There were entire communities, and even in Canada today, we have people called Métis, who are considered mixed French and Indian. There were communities in Chicago and Detroit and Green Bay and Nebraska and Kansas and South Dakota who were mixed French and Indian. So when the United States came and entered into treaties, they had to deal with this issue and decide, what are we going to do with these people? Now, importantly, the tribes themselves who were negotiating the treaties also had to decide what they were going to do with these people. Very interesting, the first reference to blood quantum in a treaty, 1837, and this was anybody who's not less than 1/4 Indian blood will receive certain payments. What's interesting is in 1824, there were actual reservations set aside specifically for mixed race people. The tribes are here, these mixed race people are over there. So there were certain reservations in that Louisiana Purchase area specifically set aside for people who are recognized as being mixed blood Indians. There are actual 4 or 5 treaties that explicitly say mixed bloods are members of our tribe and shall be recognized as such. So clearly, when you get later in the treaty area within this Nebraska, Kansas, there was a debate going on, and the tribes themselves decided to insist that these provisions in these treaties recognize their mixed blood relatives, period. And so you will have these specific treaties saying they are members. Now, the federal courts had to grapple with this issue. If you know the case of U.S. v. Rogers, white guy kills white guy, but he was married to a Cherokee. Cherokee law recognized the ability to enroll even white guys, and white women actually, as long as you were married to a tribal member. So their tribal law actually had a provision in it that said, if you come in, you can be naturalized as a Cherokee even if you have no Cherokee blood. So then the question was, at that time, a crime between Indian and Indian, there was no federal jurisdiction. The Major Crimes Act did not exist until 1885. That created the ability of the U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute Indians on Indian land for crimes committed against each other. So Rogers said, well, I'm an Indian, the guy I killed was an Indian, therefore, federal government, you cannot prosecute me. U.S. Supreme Court, after he died, Rogers actually died before the case got to the U.S. Supreme Court, but they didn't care. The U.S. Supreme Court said, wait a minute, Indian's a race. Indian is a race. Just because this guy was naturalized as a Cherokee citizen, we still have jurisdiction to prosecute him because he is a white person. Now, how do you deal with mixed race people? There were 2 cases in the 19th century that dealt with this problem, and they went either way. One said, as long as the mother is Indian, this person is Indian. But then the next one said, as long as the father is Indian, that person is Indian, which means if the father is white, that person is not an Indian. Notice blood quantum does not enter into this analysis. If you read the cases, particularly the one from 1879, Ex parte Reynolds, the federal judge is grappling with this problem. Well, there's got to be some blood quantum level where this person is no longer Indian. But it hurts my head so much to think about that. I'm just not going to do that. I'm just going to say as long as the father is Indian, that person is Indian, which means this person's father was not Indian. Therefore, I have the ability to prosecute and execute this person for this crime because the person is not Indian. Now, allotments. Allotments, of course, there's numerous allotments at Navajo. I believe there are some at Laguna. And, of course, this derives mostly from a statute called the Dawes Act. It is mentioned in the program, the General Allotment Act. And, of course, the idea was reservations need to be broken up. We need to give land to individuals, not a communal ownership, so they can become good American farmers, and then they will assimilate into white society. That was the entire intention. But even at that time, they decided the tribes had to agree to this allotment. We can't just go out and say, we're allotting you, whether you like it or not. So then the question becomes, if the tribes agreed to allotment, which was true until 1906, who gets an allotment? Who is a tribal member? Because I will argue that this issue comes up when there is something worth fighting about, and it's usually land or money. That is when the federal government and tribes have decided we need to figure out who's a member. Because, of course, if there's no significance to it, because whoever lives in the community is a community member, why do you need to make these definitions? And so this is the major time the United States government says we have to figure this out. Who is a tribal member and who is not? Now, some people say blood quantum was utilized directly in allotment. In fact, there's a lot of tension and argument in the federal government because they had a problem. And they had a very specific problem. And the problem was tribes had to agree to sell their land. Who do you think they looked to be tribal members to sell their land? Anybody they could get a signature from. And that included mixed blood people. They said, we need enough people to approve this allotment agreement, so we'll treat all of you as tribal members. If you know anything about South Dakota, the Great Sioux Reservation was broken up by an agreement in 1889. If you read the report of the Senate, you will find something very interesting in there. They list every single person. They had to be male, because the treaty said 3/4 of male Indians. There are 94 white men listed on that list of people competent to agree to break up the reservation. Why is that? The United States at the time considered them to be tribal members because the Treaty of 1868 said anybody affiliated with the tribe. So they decided these white guys can sign our agreement to sell the land, they're tribal members. So then when they came back around and decided who would get allotments, people said, well, wait a minute, I signed this agreement, where's my allotment? Oh, wait a minute, you're not a tribal member. Well, wait a minute, I was a tribal member at the time I signed the agreement, but now you're saying I'm not a tribal member when it comes to allotment. And that was the dilemma the United States found themselves in. This is a guy rocking the sideburns here, Commissioner Thomas Morgan. There is no doubt that there is a stage at which, by the admixture of white blood and non-affiliation with Indian tribes, people would be debarred from participating in tribal benefits. Yeah, there's a time you're no longer Indian. The admixture of blood, however, must be considered in connection with all the circumstances. We're not going to apply an exact blood quantum requirement because we know we got a problem because we let them sign allotment agreements and now they're reminding of us that we did that. So we can't say 1/2, 1/4, 1/8 because, yeah, we got a problem there. These acts of the government, we've allowed them to sign, have fixed the status of mixed bloods as Indians in the sense they have an interest in the common property of the tribe to which they belong. To decide at this time that such mixed bloods are not Indians would unsettle and endanger the titles to much of the lands relinquished by Indian tribes. Uh-oh, we got a problem. We let them sign, and now they've reminded of us that that's true, so we can't exactly apply a blood quantum requirement. Certain allotment agreements, like treaties, the tribes themselves said, whoa, 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 hold on a second. These people are our tribal members. They deserve allotments. We're not going to use blood quantum. You're not going to say because their fathers were white, they're not tribal members. And certain tribes then made the United States agree that their mixed bloods were tribal members. There was an 1897 statute that tried to deal with this problem that said as long as there's a legal marriage between an Indian woman and a white man, their children are tribal members for purposes of allotment. Now, this guy is an interesting guy, Anthony Higgins from Delaware. I don't know, does anybody know what a Delaware accent sounds like? I don't know, maybe Joe Biden, but, I don't know. This is something he said on the floor of Congress. If you want to find a conspiracy of the federal government to use blood quantum, this is your guy, because this is what he said. This nation is generous and means to be generous to the Indians. But by that I know people understand and mean the Indian Aborigines, not the half-bloods, not the quarter-bloods, not the eighth-bloods, not those in whom you cannot observe the physical admixture. This is growing to be a vast abuse. He goes on. He was really worked up. It seems to me one of the ways of getting rid of the Indian question is just this of intermarriage and the gradual fading out of the Indian blood. The whole quality and character of the Aborigine disappears. They lose all traditions of their race. There is no longer any occasion to maintain the tribal relations. There is then every reason why they should go and take their place as white people do everywhere. Blood quantum will destroy tribal society. All we have to do is encourage them to intermix, and we don't have an Indian problem anymore. This crystallizes that particular way of thinking of the federal government. So when does blood quantum really starting in federal law? Well, they allotted the lands, and then they decided, well, we need to break up even that. Because, of course, allotments were held in trust, which means they couldn't be sold, but more importantly, they couldn't be taxed by the counties to generate revenue. So Oklahoma, if you know, there's all those tribes in Oklahoma. They were allotted. There are no current technical reservations. Those are U.S. Supreme Court about the Muskogee Creek Nation. And so the counties of Oklahoma went to Congress and said, we got a problem. All of these lands are in trust. We can't tax them. What are we going to do to generate revenue? And Congress said, well, we have a deal for you. We'll use blood quantum. We'll say people below a certain amount of Indian blood have no restrictions on their land at all. And then certain people will have restrictions only on one part of their land. And then everybody else, if they're close to being full blood, fine, we'll let them keep their land. And of course, what happened when they did that? Land was sold, tax foreclosures, and the county generated a lot of revenue off of this. But they used blood quantum to decide who was worthy to be protected by the federal government. Less than 1908, less than 1/2 Indian blood, you have no restrictions at all on your land, it's fully taxable, goodbye. 1/2 to 3/4, fine, you can keep your homestead, the rest of it is subject to taxation. 3/4 or more, you have total protection. What was the theory? Why were they doing this? What did they say? Well, people who are more white are more competent with their finances. We know that their white blood makes them smarter and makes them more likely not to be stupid about their land. So it's okay to release them because we don't have to worry about them. But those full-bloods, no, they're Indian. They have no idea what they're doing. Literally in the government report, they say this without irony, that this is why they're applying blood quantum, upon this assumption that somehow white blood makes you a better person when it comes to finances. But they weren't done. 1906, the White Earth Chippewa in Minnesota will release all mixed bloods from their restrictions. Problem, we don't know who's a mixed blood and who's not. So what did they do? They sent a scientist to Minnesota and they said, measure their hair, their nose, their feet. They got some hair on those feet. Those must be mixed bloods. You're released. Based upon physical anthropology. Literally, there's several good books on this. One called The White Earth Tragedy. They literally sent a scientist to decide if they had hair on their feet. And if they did, they were mixed bloods, therefore their land was open to taxation. Now, if you know anything and follow this, that meant a tremendous amount of land was transferred from Indians to whites because people could not pay their property taxes, and it was seized because they didn't pay it. 1917, the BIA said, let's just make everybody who's 1/2 Indian blood be free from restrictions. And again, literally said, well, because of their white blood, that means they're superior and they know what they're doing. Who's this guy? This dapper gentleman is, of course, very happy-looking guy, too. John Collier, the guy who created the Indian Reorganization Act. He actually is sort of, with Kit Carson, probably the most hated individual of the Navajo Nation when it comes to the federal government, because he's the guy who decided killing all the Navajo sheep was a great idea. Hence, the Navajo Nation rejected the IRA and, in fact, has no constitution today because of this man right here, Mr. John Collier. But he's also important for blood quantum because the IRA ended allotment, allowed tribes to create constitutions. There was a very particular definition in the IRA, which is of some interest. The first one, all persons of Indian descent. So if you're a white tribal citizen, you're out of luck. Who are members of a recognized tribe. And this is where this concept of certain tribes are recognized and certain are not comes from. So as long as you're a member of a tribe we believe is recognized, you're an Indian for the IRA. But look at the third one. All others of 1/2 or more Indian blood. You don't even have to be a member of a recognized tribe to be an Indian under the IRA. Problem, much like White Earth, how do we know who's 1/2 or more Indian blood? I don't know. Oh, this is what we'll do. We'll create the CDIB. We'll create a document that people can carry around that says, yes, indeed, I am 1/2 or more Indian blood. Here's my document from the BIA saying so. And the IRA was the first and the main statute that required this documentation. But that wasn't the only one. There are certain statutes from 1934 forward that do not require tribal membership. As long as you can prove you have a blood quantum, you don't even need to be a member of a tribe. There's one that creates loans for those who are 1/4 or more. If you know anything about Alaska, they have a settlement act. You have to be 1/4 Aleut, Indian, or both. You can be both as long as you're 1/4. So the BIA decided we need to issue this document so people know whether they are eligible for these programs or not, hence the CDIB. Oklahoma is interesting on the far left. There is a statute from 1947 called the Stigler Act that says if you're 1/2 or more and you own an allotment, you have to go to state court in Oklahoma, and they have to say, we hereby approve you to sell your allotment. In 1947, and it still exists today in 2018, people of these so-called civilized tribes, ironic given what we're talking about, have to go to the county court in Oklahoma simply because of their blood quantum. So the origin of why they have those little laminated cards is the assumption that 1/2 or more Indian blood means a county court has to give you permission to do something with your allotment. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Paul. Before I have a few concluding thoughts, Paul did say something about how the allotments were generated and who was able to go ahead and sell those allotments, who signed the agreement to go ahead and be able to sell allotments to dispossessed Native Americans. It's a practice that's continued on, is that the federal government and state governments, they pick and choose who they want to vest with the authority to sign away rights. Like non-Native peoples basically say, I'm appointing you because I know you're going to agree to give me something that I want. And that's a pattern that continues on and carries forth today. But what was really critical for at this junction is this idea of Native Americans having a government-to-government relationship with the federal government and state governments, or is it a racial relationship? Because what's happening right now, especially with this current administration, is the idea that Indians are a race of people, therefore there's provisions that you violate the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution as an impermissible racial identity. And the Native people always argue that our relationship is not based on race. It's based on historic treaties. It's based on historic political governmental considerations. And that is something that's being tested right now. There was a judge recently in the state of Texas that ruled that the Indian Child Welfare Act was unconstitutional because it was based upon an impermissible racial classification. Recently, the Trump administration and the Department of Health and Human Services tried to impose a work requirement, expanded work requirement upon Native peoples for the expansion of Medicaid because Native people were a race. So what we're seeing right now is this kind of push or this slant to changing the nature, the historic nature of the relationship between Native peoples and the federal government. The idea of the CDIBs, the Certificate of Degree of Indian Bloods, there's a letter that's been sent out to a number of tribal leaders basically saying that the BIA, so responsible for the creation of this idea of issuing the Certificate of Degree of Indian Bloods, now wants to get out of that business. And they want the tribes themselves to be responsible for the issuance of the CDIBs. And this is out for comment right now, and I don't know if Navajo got that or not, but there are a few tribal leaders that have had that and been asked to comment. So we've got this kind of double whammy coming where the federal government is asking you to go ahead and carry forth the burden of blood quantum. They want to get out of the business. And at the same time, they want to go ahead and racialize this. All the federal Indian law says that preferences to Native peoples, let's say in employment opportunities, is not a impermissible racial classification. It's a political distinctiveness. And that is being challenged right now. And lastly, the overriding goal of racialization is the elimination of Native Americans. There is no such thing as post-colonial. Anytime you hear someone say, well, I'm involved in post-colonial studies, slap them silly. There's no such thing as post-colonial. It's still going on, and it's very fervent, and it's very, very active. And that's why what you're doing today is systematically learning, you're systematically sharing, you're telling the committee, you're telling your people, and you're sharing amongst yourselves how you want to go ahead and carry forth into the future as sovereign people, as sovereign individuals, as sovereign nation. And I thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, gentlemen. Robert and Paul, thank you very much. So, Michelle, I want to, on our agenda, we have what's listed as a, hold on, Robert, guys. We have listed as a word cloud. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty with it, so we're going to do it on the next one. However, I think it's maybe to our benefit that I want to take a few minutes to allow you to ask some questions. If any of you might have questions or comments on the information that Paul just shared, because again, this is meant to inform you and try to educate the process. So if there's something turning in your brain that Paul mentioned that are just curious about some of this information, let me give you a few minutes to pose some questions or comments. And by the way, we got asked a couple times on the presentation. I just asked Governor if it'll be okay if when we get the presentations, we can post them on the Pueblo's website so you can download them yourselves and take a look at them when you get a chance. So any questions, comments that you might have? I saw a second hand back up there too. Okay, Ron, and then we'll go back there.
Well, Robert and Paul, I just want to thank you for, is this on? There we go, drum beat. I just want to thank you for your presentations and also just looking at the current situation, any cases that might be coming up in the courts that deal with the kind of issues that you helped us to understand today, or any legislation that you've seen that's winding its way through Congress. I think that would be important for us to be aware of as well, so we can keep in touch with whatever advocacy means or media that we choose to use. So if you could enlighten us if there are any such cases or legislation that's pending. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Solomon. As Professor Hershey mentioned, the Texas ICWA case is one of extreme importance to all tribes across the country. And as he mentioned, there is one federal judge in the Northern District of Texas who, the first one in 40 years, has decided the Indian Child Welfare Act is unconstitutional because it's based on race. Now, breaking it down a little bit, it's very interesting why he thought it was based on race. If you know anything about ICWA, there are two definitions of Indian child. So unless you're an Indian child, ICWA doesn't apply. Member of a tribe, and the second one is if you are eligible for membership and one of your parents is a tribal member. He focused on the second one and said eligible for membership is about race. Now, why is that? Because tribes use blood quantum to define their membership. That is exactly what he said. Now, interestingly enough, who is the first tribe's law that he cited for that proposition? The Navajo Nation. He cited Section 701 of Title I. He couldn't be bothered to put Title I. We have 26 sections, so he miscited it anyway. But he said Section 701 of the Navajo Nation Code, right there, the Navajo Nation uses only blood quantum, therefore that's racial. This case will get appealed. The Cherokee Nation has said, absolutely, we're appealing this. The nation just intervened again to try to get in on the case. But all tribes need to be paying attention to this case, including Laguna, because this might go to the U.S. Supreme Court. Because three of the plaintiffs are actual states, Texas, Louisiana, and Indiana. They are putting all of their resources to trying to get the Indian Child Welfare Act declared unconstitutional. So they will not stop anywhere until this case gets up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And of course, once the court gets it, it may not just be about ICWA. It could be about the entire construct of tribal sovereignty is now under attack because they believe it's race. Now, there's sort of a historical irony about this, that they would say, well, you use blood quantum, therefore it's racial, therefore you violated the Constitution. Because as we showed, this is not something the tribes originally came up with. It's your construct. It's your idea that it was created. And now you're telling us 250 years later, well, you shouldn't have done that. And because you shouldn't have done that, it's now violating the Constitution. So this statute that benefits you, oh, well, I guess you shouldn't have used blood quantum, darn, right? So, I mean, just the hypocrisy is just so overwhelming. But that would be the case, I would say, Mr. Solomon, and everyone to follow, because it is almost inevitable. Whoever wins in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, it is going to the U.S. Supreme Court, and maybe the ultimate case to decide the entire construct of tribal sovereignty and how it fits into the U.S. system.
The foundational case is called Morton versus Mancari, which is a case that you should know, because that's the case where preference was given to Native peoples for employment in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and there was a challenge on equal protection grounds, and the court ruled that it was a political distinctiveness, a government-to-government relationship, that it was not based on impermissible racial classifications. That case, which has been foundational for this idea, is under immediate threat. And if you want to go ahead and follow where the other threats are going to come from, if this is successful, you go to the Goldwater Institute's website in Arizona, because they're the ones that issued a similar challenge in the state of Arizona, and they're the ones that are backing and creating all these challenges to Native rights.
Okay, we had another question back here.
I know that Laguna only has about 40 allotments, and I know Navajo tribe has thousands of allotments, but I just wondered, nobody's been talking about that American Indian Probate Act and the effect of that on these allotments? Or even if Laguna people know about that, APRA?
Yeah. Allotments are kind of its own niche area, of course, right? I mean, Navajo, Eastern Navajo has allotments. People in Western Navajo really have no idea, right? Because it's so different. But as you say, it is a very important area that affects individuals. And because it affects individuals, particularly at Eastern, very poor individuals, not a lot of attention is put on it. Now, having said that, you, of course, have the buyback program, right, coming out of COBEL. You've got the probate statute, which creates all sorts of interesting problems, including that state law is being used to apply to, you know, inheritance and that kind of thing. There are certain institutes at certain law schools that are dealing with this probate problem, and so I would encourage you to seek those out. But, you know, there was a recent case that almost made it up to the U.S. Supreme Court involving P&M, the electric utility. I actually litigated that case. And it had to do with whether utilities can ram through power lines and gas lines on allotments without having to get consent of the tribe if the tribe owns an interest. Now, of course, because of the buyback program, and I don't know if that's true at Laguna, that's an interesting question, whether people have sold some of their interests back to the United States, which then is putting it in trust for the tribe, it creates even more complications, where it's not just an individual, now it's tribe and individual owning the same parcel, and how you deal with those problems. But the P&M case said, as long as the tribe owns even, speaking of fractions, 1/2056th interest, they cannot condemn the property without their consent. But that means you now have a relationship between individuals and the tribe that didn't exist before on these allotments. So it's an extremely complex issue, and I'm glad you flagged it for those people who do have allotments. I would reach out to those people in those institutes. I think Seattle University Law School is a probate institute for tribes. Certain other law schools come on invitation and work with people on those things, and that's what I would encourage you to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We got one way in the back here.
Good morning, everyone. We're here talking about this, and I don't see too many of our younger tribal members here. And, I think this needs to get across to them also about how, we're losing our blood quantity. And, these two gentlemen up here have a lot of knowledge about that. And I think it would be wise to have them come back to the high schools and give presentations to the students. And that way the younger people can realize that, what is really going on, how we are losing that blood quantum, that, maybe there needs to be more Laguna intermarriages instead of them going off the reservation. We can't choose who our younger people settle with, but we can encourage them to keep our blood quantum going by, keeping with tribal members. And, there was a thing up there that said, how the government wanted to phase out, the blood quantum, like how it was up there, like marrying or not marrying, into tribes. But it would be wise. I see it like that, how it would be good to come back and give a presentation to the younger, to the high school, the middle school, and that way they'll realize what we're going to be going through, what they're going to be facing in the future. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. One of the things that I hope happens is that this is not the only time we get together. As we said earlier, today is not the day to make a decision, but to hopefully inform you and educate on what these issues are. But I hope that there'll be a few more of these conversations, because if it does turn out that we want to go to an alternative other than blood quantum, we'll have to go down the path of a referendum and a constitutional change. But in getting there, it's important that we continue to converse on this and have these conversations, because this is just the start. I think there's going to be many other conversations, and my sister back there, I think, made a very good point that we have to involve the younger people in these conversations. There was a question.
Wait, just a second, 1 second. Tomorrow on the program, Norbert Hill and Kathleen Rattery are going to be talking about Laguna civics, where instead of just learning about American history, state history, things that, they're going to be talking about inculcating and bringing a Laguna civics, and this would be part of that kind of educational format too, to educate about the history of the relationship and history of the federal Indian law, but in a way that's accessible.
Thank you, Robert.
Guatsi hopa tiami hanuch wishtui SSH sashe tamea me osuta ku haku me osuta Good morning, everybody. My name is Jackson Swazo. I'm from the pueblos of Santa Ana, Acoma, Laguna, and Taos. And as you can tell, blood quantum is very important to me. The determination of who we are as an individual in our place in the community has a very important effect on how a young person grows. I have had quite an experience growing up in a public school while being heavily participating in Santa Ana. However, I am federally registered in Laguna, and I'm proud because I have a saying of mine of who I am in the semblance of my four homes, of Laguna being represented in my ears, Taos being represented in my last name, Acoma represented in my nose, and Santa Ana represented in where my spirit lives, because where I dance, where I find the most security in who I am. And I'm sorry, I forgot your name, and I actually do agree with you that this history needs to be taught to more of my generation and younger, because the idea that I have come with, I'm a sophomore at Fort Lewis College in Durango studying in Native American Studies with a minor in political science. And a lot of where my passion comes from with blood quantum, as well as contemporary issues of Native nations, comes down to the fact of how contradictive the US government has been in implementing public policy against Native American peoples on the semblance of who we are and the lack of what we had. And right now, what we had in abundance, our language, our land, our family, our community, is being threatened. And from that, the education of that history, it has opened my eyes that I feel will open my generation as well as youngers to how much we have to fight on a day-to-day basis. And from there, what are we fighting for? What are our elders fighting for? And from them, when they grow up, giving them the responsibility starting at a young age of what they can fight for and what they deem is valid and important. And I think what comes down to the education of this history is to make sure that they have the tools to go out into the world and deal with non-natives. And what I had to do and still continue to do is protect who we are in the idea of non-natives, of, I guess, a pan-Indian perspective of us and how diverse we are. And I argue this point every day, and I hear from other Native students at Fort Lewis, Dene students, Comanche students, etc., of being Pueblo, of how lucky we are to still be within some semblance of our ancestral homes, as well as how communal we are. A lot of people don't have that. And that's where I find strength, is in the community and how we all take each other's issues as well as problems and we make them our own, as much as we do not like to. But you know what? That's what makes, and what I see makes us Pueblo, is that community. And growing up and finding out that the place of which I participate the most grew up on, that I was technically not recognized there, made me think, like, how I participate, don't I? I'm trying to learn the language as best as I can. However, it was not formally education-wise taught to me, nor even just a traditional oral sense really taught to me. I had to fight for that. And I feel that there are many, many kids, not only Pueblo in the general sense of Native American kids, that are fighting this ability to identify. And I feel it shouldn't be this hard to claim what others are not claiming you, I guess, in that way. And I believe that this narrative of Native American history is a calling to me, and I feel like it could be a calling to others to really take a look back and to help people realize there's a fight out there and it's not going to end anytime soon. But when we come together in community, in membership, and that idea of community as being our core values, I feel that it can only lead to progress. And from there, I'm not speaking as the youth, however, the many youth that I have spoken to, we are looking to all of you that are here. No matter if you're in tribal leadership or not, we look to you because in some cases we feel we still don't have a voice. We still don't have a platform to acknowledge what our ancestors have deemed tradition, and in some cases blood quantum is used as tradition, or at least argued that fact. And so who are we being taught in our ways to challenge our elders? And I think it comes down to us realizing it's not a challenge, it is simply a perspective of which has been deemed non-developed. But to reassure you all that we are thinking about things like this, and if you just merely give us that platform, we will surprise you and we'll make you proud, because that's what we're trying to do that way.
Thank you, Jackson. And Jackson, some of you may or may not know Travis Swazuk Anishtia. That's his father. So some of you that may not know him. But Jackson done some work when he was still in high school on blood quantum. And so he has some pretty good knowledge on it. So hopefully, you'll stay involved with this work, Jackson. And good to see you. Glad you came home. I want to go ahead and ask if there's any more questions. We'll take one more question, and then we're going to transition into the next presentation. And see a hand up here. And we also have a drawing that we're going to do. So while the drawing's taking place, I'm going to set up the next presentation, and I'm going to also set up the word cloud, because we're going to test it on this next one to see if it'll work. But let's take the last question, and after the question, then we'll do a drawing and go into our next presentation. On your agenda, you also see a break on there. We're a little bit behind schedule, so I'll just encourage you, if you need the bathroom or whatnot, to go ahead and go. And so that way we can kind of get back on schedule. So, okay, so Mr. Anaya.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Grazie, Sehopa. I just want to go ahead and comment on the agenda, but I work at a high school, but all this history that we're hearing today really needs to be working to our U.S. history classes in high school, because I get guest speakers coming in to explain some of this rhetoric that's going on. But again, like I said, I think we really need a lot of high school students, or students in general. I'm very proud of my cousin here. She brought her boy to this conference so that way he could go ahead and hear exactly what has been said. But all this information that we get here really needs to be brought into the U.S. history. And also, I took courses in college. It didn't really mention anything to this effect. Now that we got a woman in Congress, maybe we can all get together and go ahead and make her bring all this recent information to the U.S. History teachers throughout college and also in high school. And I appreciate your conference here. I think it's real good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anaya.
Thank you. Congratulations to the next representative.
So with that said, I'm going to turn the microphone over here to Elsie and Lorraine to do, I'm sorry, Paul and Robert, thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the microphone over to, sounds like an alarm. Turn the microphone over here to Elsie and Lorraine to do a drawing. And while they're doing that, I'm going to get set up on the next presentation. Sorry about the alarm. I'm not sure what that is.
Okay, if you would take out your lunch tickets. Yeah. We're going to be raffling off the Great Vanishing Act. And we'll read only the last 4 numbers. This is a book written by Kathleen Rattery and Norbert Hill, and they will be presenters tomorrow. It's about blood quantum and the future of Native nations. It's very good reading. I've read the book, and I encourage all of you to try to get this book. It's very good reading for everyone. Okay, the first number is 6249. 6249. Way up there at the top. The next number is 6333. 6333. 64, okay, I'm sorry, 6466. 6466. The next number is 6266. 6266. Okay, then we'll go to the next number, 6350. 6350. No one? Okay, the next number is 6500, 6500. Way over there. $62.71. Okay, 63.25. 63.25. No, no one. Okay, 65.03. 65.03. $62.77. 62.77. $63.82. 63.82. $65.11. 65.11. $62.89. Yeah, yeah. 65. $64.01. 6505. $62.90. $62.90. Okay, we'll do two more. 6410. 6410. 6455. 6455. One more, 6301. 6301. Over here, girls.
Okay, thank you, Elsie and Lorraine. That's a pretty interesting book. So those of you that were lucky and won today, take some time to flip through it and read some of the articles in there. And they have a few more, so hopefully several others you will grab one as well. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our next presentation. And this one is very specific to our Pueblo. And so hopefully this is one that will really bring to light, the challenges that we face today. And so just reading you the overview here, our Pueblo has a long and storied history with blood quantum. Prior to the First Amendment of our Constitution in 1949, there were no membership requirements to belong to our Pueblo. With the passage, implementation, and acceptance of the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act, we saw the dawn of what was to be a sometimes divisive and always exclusive policy of who was a part of the tribe, and an even more thorny conversation of who has the authority to decide. The objective of this particular presentation is the presentation will give you a history of blood quantum specific to our Pueblo. We will share with you the challenges that have been made, the policy impacts on our Pueblo, and hopefully provoke thought around the dilemma we face of perpetuating or terminating a framework that is not required for use for us to engage. There is a long history of determination policy, the policy that was created to do away with the trust, responsibility, and status of American Indians. Maybe it's time we turn the tables on determination policy and apply it to blood quantum. The things we would like you to think about here is blood quantum is not a federal requirement or a mandate for tribes, yet we're doing it. When did we shift from belonging being based on core values and the principles our Kiva leaders talked about to one being influenced by benefits and policy? If we do not address the issue now, what will our future look like as a federally recognized tribe? If not us, who? If not now, when? If our tribe continues to decrease because of blood quantum, why do we need to keep growing our resources, and what happens to our land? So things like that I would like you to think about. And so this presentation that we'll provide you is the presentation our membership committee put together for the council. And so I would also like the membership committee, once we get done with the presentation, to come up and join me on stage, because as we open it up for questions, we've all worked on this together, so somebody might be able to answer the questions better than I can. So I would ask if you want to come up now, it's up to you, but I'll invite the membership committee members to come up. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So 2012 and beyond, Governor in his opening remarks talked about what inspired this work and what's moved it forward, and it was that amendment that happened in 2012 to remove the 2-year restriction. And to go a little bit further on that, some of you recall that in 1984, the amendment was made to our Constitution to put a 2-year restriction that basically said when a child is born, it is the responsibility of the parent, guardian, or whomever to enroll that child within 24 months, within 2 years. If they miss that timeline, even if you're Fort Forest Laguna, you're out of luck. The best you could be is naturalized. And there was no alternative. So in 2012, the conversations we were having around this was, we understand why or what the logic was in that we wanted to continue to increase our membership. It was beginning to flatline because nobody was meeting the 1/2 blood requirement any longer. They also wanted parents to be responsible to the enrollment. So we see those different pieces of logic that came in. But in our conversations, we also had the thought and dialogue that, well, what about those children, those young people that were adopted out? Wasn't their fault. But because they missed that 2 years, not of their fault, they can't be members. That's not fair to them. Or situations where people, back in the day, there was probably much more strictness to it. When an individual married out from one tribe into another, they went to their spouse's tribe in many instances. Life happens, maybe the spouse passes on, the individual wants to come back, but there was no path back. So it's that kind of stuff that we wanted to make sure we addressed, and so that's where this came from. So again, Governor went over the purpose of the committee. The issue we'll go through are embracing of the blood quantum and the challenges we face today. The committee members that you see here, this is our assignment from council. We were assigned to assist council by researching and providing a history on tribal membership and the impacts of continued use of blood quantum criteria. Identify research work that has been done in prior years on tribal membership, and that's why we also look to others that have done this work and those that are speaking and helping us out over the next couple days. Research what other tribes have done or are doing to address blood quantum issues. What the committee is not assigned to do. We're not assigned to determine policy or outcome. That's not our job. We're not assigned to determine a new membership model. That's not our job. However, at the end, you will see we've had to have conversations about what is that, because we get asked. But in no way is it saying this is the model that we should do. We've met with the enrollment committee as well, and we all have I think it's safe to say we have a consensus of what we think we could go forward with. But again, that's not our job to determine that. And we have no authority to say who are members and who is not. So that's the function of the group here. The basic question that we're trying to answer, and again, this goes to the question earlier of even getting with the high school kids and future conversations. Does the Pueblo of Laguna want to continue with the use of blood quantum? Yes or no? That's the basic question we're trying to answer. But in order to answer this seemingly simple question, this type of background and information is important to help you make the best informed decision. So I want to start with this slide. And Ms. Silva Lorraine has helped us significantly with data and putting this together. And in no means is this scientifically sound or anything like that, but it's just meant to give you the concept of what's going on with our numbers, what's going on with our membership. So as you recall, as we read in there, prior to 1958, in order to be on the Laguna rolls, you only had to be 1/2 Indian. You didn't even have to be Laguna, just 1/2 Indian. And you could be on the rolls. In 1958, they changed that, they meaning the council, or the people, I guess, changed it to make the requirement you had to be 1/2 Laguna. So what I did is I took the data that Lorraine has, and in 1958, those that were on record with the 1/2 Laguna requirement or more, our population, oops, my pointer's not working. Oh, there it is. The population in 1958-59 was 3,240 tribal members. That's how many we had. So what I said then is that from 1958 to today, what if we did nothing? What if we didn't change? Meaning, in 1984, when we reduced it to 1/4, what if we didn't do that? What would our population look like today? So if we didn't make that change in 1984, today we would have 2,522 tribal members compared to the 8,800 that we have on record today. So we went one step further and said, let's push this out 30 years. Again, with just on the hypothesis that we did not make any changes, if we were still at 1/2. In 30 years, that's what our membership would be. Now think about it, of that, half of those individuals are not childbearing. So you got about 200 people. But if they have offspring with someone other than someone in this group, their offspring wouldn't be members. And this group are probably all related. So there's a different issue, right? So again, just the disclaimer, this is not a scientific, we just took the data that's there and just so that we could give a picture of what's going on. But it's pretty good data that they have there. We played around with it a little bit more and said, 1984, here's what the membership was. But the trend happens, as you're seeing, as we go on in time, we might get a bump, then it goes down. 1984, we got a bump, then we went down. 2012, when we made the amendment in 2012, we got a bump. And then, again, this is obviously not, we didn't go real far on this, but you're beginning to see the trend. So hopefully what you're getting from this is that blood quantum, when we change the blood quantum amount, all it gives us is a Band-Aid. Then we go back down. We can lower it again, and it goes back down. Kind of like a heartbeat monitor. So those of you that are mathematicians also know that mathematically, this will eventually go to 0. So this is why this is so serious. We need to be thinking about the Jacksons and about the Tonys and all these young people. This is very critical for us. Moving on to this slide. In addition to doing to ourselves through blood quantum by minimizing ourselves, these are other things that are happening out there. This is from the U.S. Census. And you're seeing, white children of black and white intermarriages, black children of black and white intermarriages, same thing. You're seeing that trend. It's going down. Going down. And what's one of the things that's driving this? So you've seen in the last census, one of the things that has changed in the census is you have the option to choose American Indian, Alaskan Native, Hawaiian, but you also have the option to choose mixed race. And many of our people, what we're seeing now is many of our people are choosing mixed race. Not that it's a bad thing, but because they are. And mixed race doesn't mean that you're Native and Anglo or Native and African American or Native and Asian or whatnot. You could be Acoma, Zuni, Laguna, and Navajo. You're a mixed race. And people are choosing that. What's the significance of that? The American Indian population plummets. The mixed race population skyrockets. And we're seeing that happen. So the challenge we run into, and Professor Hershey talked about it, Paul talked about it, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, we're helping the argument on race. We need to be mindful of that. That's why blood quantum is such an issue for us right now. You've seen in the national news with the president trying to use that argument of race in his opposition to Medicare and all those kind of things. We need to be careful how we define ourselves. I'm sorry, let me fix this thing real quick. So one of the things, also just to think about how we're being erased, if you will, for lack of a better word. You look at over here, 1492, probably all Native people here. But as the years go on, it gets less and less and less. And there's a big question mark at 2090. You look at the map today, it's just speckles. Again, from U.S. Census, we tout and we talk a lot about if we could just come together as tribes and work as one, or just work, we'll be strong. But look at this chart. There's purple, Native Hawaiians. There's 2 or more races, green, you can see it. Asian, yellow. Black, orange. Hispanic, blue. Anglo, white. Here's Native American, the light blue. If you can find it, please point it out for me. Right? And this is pretty recent data. Paul talked a lot of from a historical perspective, and it's absolutely true that it's still impacting us today. Here's this table, and right here, in this line that says Fund for Civilizing Indians. So this is the boarding school period. There was actually money put aside to civilize all of us. The allotment era and all the things that happened there, the Dawes Act, the Indian Reorganization Act, determination era, self-determination. What's important about this conversation that we're having and that we're going to continue to have is that self-determination era We want to make sure that we're not the cause of our own self-termination. Some of you may have had, over the years, had the opportunity to serve or at least talk, visit with one of our former governors, with Tom Daley. And it's interesting conversation with him. One of the things he shares is, he served in World War II. And he said under Eisenhower, he said, this was one of the generals I would have jumped off a cliff. I would have given my life for him. War ends, they come home. Eisenhower goes into public office, institutes the termination policy, and Tom is saying, here I am wanting to give my life for this guy. Now he wants to erase me. The contradictions and the conflicts that continue, right? The history, Andrew Jackson. We're not his favorite. But look at this. It gives me pleasure to announce to Congress that the benevolent policy of the government, steadily pursued for nearly 30 years in relation to the removal of the Indians beyond the white settlements, is approaching to a happy consummation. Celebratory to get rid of us. Many of us probably in our, whether it's elementary, middle school, high school history classes, we've probably seen this somewhere along the way, right? The Declaration of Independence. We're all familiar with the area I have highlighted in yellow. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Most of us probably haven't read beyond that. If you read a few more pages down, it also says, he, and they're referring to the King of Britain, he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So all men are created equal except us. Are you even human? Probably not. You're a savage. Right? So this didn't start just when the Indian Reorganization Act came in. This has been a long history and storied history of this. Continuing with the kill the Indian, save the man. Right? Wipe out your culture. Wipe out who you are. This is modern times. These are from newspaper clippings just not too long ago. If we take down Confederate statues, American Indians will complain next. Wow. Newt Gingrich compares Trump to former president who engineered genocide of native tribes. That was Andrew Jackson, the earlier picture I showed you. He's probably the biggest change agent since Andrew Jackson. This is some pretty scary stuff. And the why I say this is scary, having had the privilege to serve in tribal leadership, many tribes are very dependent on the very government that wants nothing to do with us. Here's the picture that Paul showed you, pretty famous. I know all of you can't see this, I can't see it, but I'll maybe one of these days I'll share the document with you if you have a chance. This is a listing of some of our tribal members that, if you recall, in the late 1880s, we had some turmoil going on here in our pueblo. And there was a faction of our people that left and went to Isleta. This is them. And one of the things that was happening here is later in that time period, one of the governors, Pablo Abeda, I believe was his name, for whatever reason, grew a dislike to the Lagunas that settled there in Isleta and wanted to disenroll them or have them leave the Isleta Pueblo. The government stepped in and said, you've already adopted them, therefore you have to keep them. Basically is what it boiled down to. And that's basically what this statement's talking about. Those individuals listed in those sections are Laguna Indians adopted by the Pueblo Indians of Isleta. The federal government said, you took them, you got to keep them. Almost kind of the same scenario that Paul talked about 250 years ago. You use blood quantum. Today you're saying, well, now you're stuck with it. Right? Here's some of the challenges and the things that we're faced with. Again, blood quantum is not a mandate. The 58 Constitution adopted 1/2 Laguna blood quantum based on the 1940 census of 1/2 any Indian. And we really need to emphasize that, because in our committees, part of the conversation we also had was making sure that there's not critique, there's not challenge, because you often hear sometimes folks might say, well, I'm for Forest Laguna, but because of that, how do we know? How do you know? Even things like Ancestry.com and 23andMe, they don't look at your ancestry using blood, right? So how do you know? And it's not meant to be a challenge or a question, but simply for us to provoke thought. And it goes back to what our traditional leaders talked about this morning. We belong because of our responsibility and the gift that we have of each other. Here's a quick snapshot of the timeline. 1908, no membership requirement or enrollment roles. One of the things I want to point out in our 1908 Constitution, yesterday we had an opportunity to do some pre-planning work, and we're fortunate to have a couple of our former governors with us. So Roland Johnson was with us, and Conrad Lucero was with us. And one of the things that surfaced was the conversation of, I don't know how many of our people know that prior to the passage of this Constitution in the late 1800s, we had 3 Anglo governors. Mr. George Pratt, Robert Marmon, and his brother. What was his name? Drew a blank. Oh gosh, should have that. Sorry, it'll come back to me. But the 2 Marmon brothers were governors, Anglos, Presbyterian. And when you now look at the Constitution in 1908 that got adopted, it mirrors federal government structures. But in the very last paragraph in there, or clause, whatever the right legal terminology is when I'm talking about constitutions, but that very last clause says something to the effect, and I'm just paraphrasing, with the passage and adoption of this Constitution, all previous decisions and traditions are now null and void. Because if you think back, Laguna was like many of the other pueblos. We had a cacique system. They appointed the leaders. The last known record of an individual that was appointed was in the early to mid 1800s. He lived his life out at Mesita. That was during that time period of that turmoil when folks left and went to Isleta. They ousted him, and he lived his life at Mesita. And whoever the new power was at the time is what brought this forward. So 1949, we saw our first constitutional amendment. In that constitutional amendment, we adopted the IRA. We also adopted the one-half Indian. So this is when we began to see blood quantum come in. It also didn't have, in this time period, the born out of wedlock issue. You know right now that when you apply or for your children or whomever or selves for a child to become a member, they look at whether the child was also born out of wedlock. There was nothing like that during this time period. 1958, now we saw the one-half Laguna blood quantum imposed. Born out of wedlock was also imposed during the 1958 Constitution. But what's interesting is the born out of wedlock only applies to the males, not to the females. So it makes for, makes you curious as to why was that written that way. 1984 amendment adopted by council stated that anyone born out of wedlock and did not meet the 1/4 blood quantum could not be recognized. Wow. We're making it even harder to belong. Lowered blood quantum to 1/2, 2-year restriction added, and introduced the paternity decree. So we just keep making it harder and harder for our people, right? 2012, amendment to remove the 2-year restriction and the start of the work that we're doing today. So that's a quick snapshot of the things that have happened. One of the pieces that I want to point out to you, this is our Constitution, our current Constitution. So we're working this whole issue on blood quantum. And what's the alternative? Article 2, membership. Section 3, powers of Pueblo Council over membership. The Pueblo Council shall have the sole authority to determine eligibility for enrollment as a member of the Pueblo. No, and I repeat, no decree of any court purporting to determine membership in the Pueblo, paternity, or degree of Laguna Indian or other blood shall be recognized as determinative of membership in the Pueblo. I'm not an attorney, but I would interpret that to mean that blood quantum is not a determinant of membership. I stand to be corrected. Like I said, I'm not an attorney, but that's how I read it. You might interpret it different. But this is the dilemma that I also think we're up against. Is the solution already there? If Laguna Indian or other blood is not a determinant, then why are we using it? And who made us? And if this is the case, the impact we may have had to all those children that we told them you can't be a member. Here's another one that comes up quite frequently in our conversations in our community. I'm sure all of you have had at one time or another the conversation about naturalized members. And the answer is usually, well, naturalized members don't have any rights. This is an ordinance that was passed, Ordinance number 3, that was passed in 1959, Naturalization Ordinance. If the council is satisfied that the applicant for membership will make a proper and satisfactory member of the Pueblo of Laguna, the council shall acquaint the applicant with the rules and regulations of the Pueblo and shall give the applicant rights as a conditional member of the Pueblo of Laguna, a conditional member. No conditional member of the Pueblo shall be entitled to any Pueblo financial benefits, land assignments, or other rights in the Pueblo. A conditional member may acquire full rights to Pueblo financial benefits and land assignments after such person has gone through a probationary period of 5 years from the date of receiving conditional membership. So naturalized members, after 5 years, you have full rights. This ordinance has never been rescinded. It's still our law in the books. So since 1958, has our council been in violation of this? At whose expense? The children. That's why this is so important. Also notice, it's not talking about blood quantum. Nowhere in there does it mention blood quantum. And it goes back to the Constitution. The council doesn't determine membership based on blood quantum or paternity or a decree, a court order, or whatever. They have full discretion to determine who will be a member. This is consistent with that section in the Constitution. What we're doing today with blood quantum is not. Here are other things that come in that I think are really important. The power to regulate domestic relations, marriages. During this same time period, as we were doing our research, I know where he's at, Tribal Secretary Cerno was also very helpful in doing this research. One of the things that also happened in this period was the further pushing away and pushing out of our own teachings and principles to where traditional marriages were no longer recognized, but you needed to have a state license or whatever. Now, when you think about this, traditional marriages are also a way of belonging. We've devalued that system and adopted someone else's. Even in this process, one of the things we've talked about is the clan system as a mechanism or as a way of identifying and belonging. Many of you in the audience probably heard some of the things that I heard my gram and other elders tell us. You do not date, you do not marry, you do not with your same clan. Clans were just as strong as the blood relation, but we've devalued the clan system. Right? So how we have every bit of authority to re-strengthen that. It's not going to take the government, it's going to take us. Right? The challenges we face, self-termination, at least on paper, if we don't address some of these things, citizenship versus membership versus belonging. And Governor's comments in his opening remarks, as he said, we're using membership pretty conveniently and maybe even unconsciously. But does that translate to mean belonging? You've heard our traditional leaders this morning and several others using the language. How would you say membership? And what does that mean? We can interpret it here, but does it have a different meaning here? The model we have right now is a model of exclusion, not inclusion. Educating our folks on this issue is very important. But it's just not us sitting here or the speakers, it's each other. Because I know I've talked to some of you, and some of you have some pretty deep knowledge of this issue. Share it. So the last slide here, again, the disclosure is that our role is not to say, here's the solution, but it would be unfair to share with you the conversations that, unfair if we didn't share the conversations we've had with the enrollment committee and amongst ourselves many times, is to, well, if the people say we want to move away from blood quantum, then what is it? What do we do? And so for us, the way we looked at it is that if we continue with blood quantum, then, you probably know what the outcome is going to be in a few years, the continued decline. And looking at other models and other communities and other tribes, what we thought about was a very simple one. I guess the English terminology for it is lineage. Conrad talked about Ayawish. But our thinking is that if the child can tell who, and we can verify who their parents or grandparents are, that's all that should matter. Of course, that's a very simplistic way. Others may have other ways of thinking about this, maybe more complicated. But if maybe, because we also talked about when we made the presentation to council, that the blood, the who we have on the rolls now and who has been on the rolls, we shouldn't just chuck that out the window, but we should use that as the baseline. If your parents, grandparents, or whomever are on the rolls now and you can reference back to that, that serves as the baseline. You may not have 1/4 or 1/8 or whatever, but if you know that's my grandfather, that's all that should matter. Because you might only have 1/8 or whatever, but you got everything else. You have a big clan, you have a small clan, you've lived your whole life here. So again, this is about belonging. So that being said, that's the presentation that is very specific to Laguna, the challenges that we're up against, why there was an urgency on the council to move this forward, to try to get this done this year. This is the driver. And I hope it's provoked some thought for you to think about how do we go forward. We can make it really hard, or we can make it fairly easy. So that being said, we're going to do a word cloud, but before we do that, let me give you the opportunity to ask any comments or questions of the committee here that you might have on the presentation. Guys, if we can get your help with the microphones. So, any questions? We have one here. Right there. She's bringing the microphone.
Good morning. When you were just mentioning about using the roles as your baseline, and if you can determine who your grandfather was, I hope that you also included grandmother. Okay, great. Thank you.
We have a question way back there. Oh, sorry. I didn't see.
Hi. I was
Hello.
just wondering, in your research, do you have any examples of tribes that don't use blood quantum?
Who did we pull?
Because I know some tribes in Oklahoma don't use blood quantum.
Right. There's Cherokee and
How do they determine membership?
so I'm gonna ask Lorraine to help us with that because she's more versed on that piece. Yes. Okay, but her question was, who's not? So part of our work, and I'm not trying to avoid your question, but one of the groups that we saw was like Cherokee, and Paul pointed it out, but we didn't drill down real deep as to see, well, how do they determine membership, and what are those other scenarios that are being used to determine membership when blood quantum is not being used. Professor Hershey was just informing me that they are going to give us some additional information on this, so hopefully we'll be able to give you a little bit more info on that. And I think that's a very good question, and it validates the reason why this shouldn't be the only conversation, because we need to drill down on those types of scenarios so that we're better informed on these issues. Okay. There's a question way back here. If somebody raises their hand and I don't see you, please wave like that because these lights are really bright.
Okay, it's very interesting hearing about in the, I think 58, 59, where the tribe was decided not using that blood quantum, but under certain conditions of accepting individuals as tribal members. And I think that leaves it leads us to debate on what these conditions are, and that's I would say probably problematic to determining who would be a tribal member. And so like 5 years, you could be considered a tribal member. If you go to ditch work, if you go to the tribal meetings, you perform or do these certain ceremonials. And that's where I find it interesting, where council would say something like that or declare something like that. And the way I see tribal council is us. Tribal council is the Laguna people. So that the Laguna people would put that forward. It's kind of strange talking about blood quantum because we all grew up with blood quantum. You had to be a certain blood quantum. You had to have this certain type of blood to be called Laguna. And I think we all struggle with that. I mean, I know I do. I know my children do, and it's strange to me to discuss things like that. But as far as those certain conditions, and when do these certain conditions, do you have to fulfill them all the way through? Throughout your whole life on the reservation, because I've heard about that, but that's the first time I've seen a document like that showing that if one were to be naturalized, they could become a tribal member by certain conditions, and it's just something I've never seen before, and I'm glad we're all here. I'm glad a lot of people kind of came. I was kind of worried that there'd be like 20 people here, and but hopefully we continue this conversation. Hopefully tomorrow we see the same crowd or even a little bit more of our people coming out to talk about it or discuss it. But that's all I have right now.
Thank you very much for that comment. And it's real important. We have a question way back there. One of the things that I think that is very important that was surfaced in your comment, And it goes back to what the traditional leaders told us this morning. As it relates to that 1958 document, what were those conditions? What were those parameters? It was probably responsibility. You hear a lot in this day and age, well, we have rights, we have rights, we have rights. But you also heard the grandmas and grandpas say, well, first you have responsibility. So our system is different. The outside has rights. We have responsibility. And that may have driven that document. I'm speculating, but thinking of the time period it was done, that might have been the driver. Yes, ma'am. Well, we're going to take one more question from the back, and then we're going to do a word cloud real quick, and then we'll wrap up and start getting some lunch and prepare for Mr. Sullivan's presentation. Yes, ma'am.
My question was, if that Resolution 3 in 1958 has never been rescinded, then those right now that are naturalized could be recognized fully as lagunas. Is that my understanding?
Easy answer, yes. The thing that I think council maybe never done is put the policy and the procedures behind that as to how you do that. I don't know if it was meant to be that hard, but the easy answer is yes, they should have rights, like a responsibility, like everybody else.
Why?
Okay, anybody want to make any quick comments before we wrap up? Okay, if you could, I would like to ask all of you to please take a quick second and give these folks a round of applause, man. They've worked really hard this last year and a half, so thank you, guys. So with that, let me pull up this word cloud real quick. Okay, again, this isn't anything scientific. It's just to kind of get a feel for what you're thinking. So those of you that have cell phones, get your cell phones out. Y'all got them out? Go to your text, like you're going to do it, send a text message. And you're not required to do it, just who might want to try. In where you put the number or name who you're going to text to, put in 22333. Once you get that in your message box, like where you're going to type your message, put my name, Richard, Luark 378. Put that in the message box and then press send. So everybody got it? Did you get a little message that says it went through? Okay. One of the younger kids, you want to go over and help? Huh? Oh, no, this is a text-based app. Okay, I'm gonna move on, and we can tie in at any moment or any time. Okay, so you see up there, there's a question. Our Laguna way of belonging should be determined by, And you have three options. Ourselves, the government, or other. Whichever one you think is the right answer, type in that word and press send. Did anybody else press anything other than ourselves? Sabe Chavez? So I wanted to just test this just to see if this is working because we're having some issues with it. But as you see what this does and what it helps us do, is it begins to see what's the collective thought going on here. The biggest word is ourselves. So the majority, that means the majority of you think we should make that determination, not someone else. Some of you think the government should tell us who we should be. Sabe is flexing. So what we're trying to use this tool here for is to try to capture your thoughts, but also to document some of the feedback that you're providing us. So that was our test. So hopefully we can use them in the next ones because we were having trouble with it this morning, so that's why I wanted to try it here. So with that, thank you very much for this piece of the presentation and your attention. We're going to go ahead and transition and have Mr. Sullivan come up and get ready. While he's doing that, the food, I believe the food is ready? No? Is it? The food should be ready. Somebody give me a wave or let me know, is the food ready? No? Hello, somebody? Can't see back there. Okay, looks like the food's not ready. We were scheduled to have lunch ready at noon, but, oh man. 12:30. Okay, let's go ahead and take a quick break. While that's getting ready, we're a little ahead of schedule, and we'll have Ron get set up. So let's take a quick 15-minute break, and then we'll get into the next presentation. Hopefully the food will be set up, and then you can grab your food and munch while Mr. Solomon is giving his presentation. Thank you. They're going to raffle off, how many more? They're going to raffle off some more books, so listen up.
Okay, the first number that we have, again, looking at your lunch ticket, 6266. 6266. Okay.